Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Premier David Eby says BC will revise the DRIPA legislation to scale back the power of the courts when it comes to Indigenous rights. We'll hear from BC Conservative MLA Peter Milobar and former BC Green MLA Adam Olsen. And we are taking your calls. Do you think DRIPA should be amended? What would it mean for reconciliation? After 12:30, Dine Out Vancouver starts today along with other events, but the restaurant industry is struggling. What's keeping you from dining out and what would draw you back? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. You can call us now on our top story. Should the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act be amended? If so, how? And what would that mean for reconciliation? Our number is 604-669-3733. That's 604-669-3733. You can also dial 1-800-825-5950 or hit pound 690. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. Premier David Eby is in Prince George, and in fact, in the last half hour, he has been speaking with reporters at the Natural Resources Forum. We're cutting a clip from that for you, and we'll play that for you later this half hour as he took questions from reporters. But last night, he did speak at the forum, and he stated his government will be amending DRIPA to scale back the power of courts in shaping reconciliation efforts.
My belief is that reconciliation is the business of government-to-government relationships between the provincial government, the federal government, and First Nations governments. It is not for the courts to take over. And that's why we're going to amend the declaration this spring to make that intent explicit. Second, issues of private property. For our government, private property is non-negotiable. People's homes and businesses are not bargaining chips. Full stop.
Again, we're taking your calls. Should DRIPA be amended? If so, how? And what would that mean for reconciliation? 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. Again, 604-669-3733 or 1-800-825-5950. Our email, bctoday@cbc.ca. First up, I'm joined by Peter Milobar, the BC Conservative MLA for Kamloops, also running to become leader of the BC Conservative Party. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
What do you make of this step the government is taking?
Well, the Premier needs to pick a lane here. When we were campaigning in the 2024 election as BC Conservatives, saying that we would repeal DRIPA and warning these exact ramifications were going to happen, he scoffed at us and called it fear-mongering and racist and all sorts of descriptions like that. And now he's essentially saying it's not working. This is legislation they brought in as the NDP that the courts are interpreting. The reality is there is a duty to achieve consent by the province. We need to move forward with that. What the province has never actually done with that duty to consult is really create a proper framework where Indigenous nations, non-Indigenous nation people within municipalities, as well as industry, know exactly what consultation looks like. But we do know with Supreme Court rulings around cases where Indigenous nations have said they weren't properly consulted and the courts have weighed in and say no, proper consultation did take effect, how to build a framework around those successful rulings to make sure everyone understands just what within the realm of the court rulings and within the realm of the Constitution, consultation really means. And that, I think, has been the missing piece of this, and the province has been absent of trying to set those frameworks up.
All right. When it comes to, for example, the Cowichan Tribe's decision, the Cowichan Tribe said they turned to the courts because of a lack of negotiation or consultation. But when you say that DRIPA was passed in 2019, it was passed unanimously in the legislature. So, you were a sitting BC Liberal MLA. Are these unintended consequences, or should the opposition then have voted for it at all?
Well, they are. I mean, we questioned the government at length. We heard lots of no legal force in effect. This will not change. Section 35 of the Constitution Act is the higher piece of legislation. And so we agreed. The 2019 vote didn't actually go to a standing vote. It likely still would have been a unanimous vote, but There was very few people actually in the chamber when that passed as a way of procedure and just kept moving forward. That's really neither here nor there where we're at today, though. Just like the Premier has had to admit with decriminalization being a failed government policy, DRIPA is not achieving what the government's own stated goals were back when they introduced it. It's time to admit they got it wrong, repeal it. It doesn't mean you walk away from reconciliation. There's been many attempts over the years of trying to get reconciliation right. This is obviously not working. It is creating a massive amount of uncomfortableness in the broader community, in the investment community. And so it's really about resetting that reconciliation framework, in my opinion, around what we've seen with Supreme Court rulings that have said what constitutes proper consultation with nations, and making sure there's a proper framework in place so that the provincial government, local governments, resource companies, and Indigenous communities all know exactly what that framework, timeline, what it really means to meaningfully consult and talk with Indigenous communities on projects or things going on within the land base.
Let me ask you before I go to our first caller here. DRIPA is meant to implement the United Nations, right, Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So wouldn't that still be in place? And would BC not be respecting UNDRIP if it were to revoke DRIPA?
Well, we said it even back, and Alice Ross had mentioned this back when UNDRIP was first brought in, that BC was actually farther advanced in what was happening with Indigenous reconciliation and relationships in BC, even before UNDRIP came up board. And there are sections of UNDRIP that we are way more advanced. And so I think we have to be mindful. This is an international document that is meant to be a guiding principle document, not a legal force and effect document. We have Section 35 of the Constitution that is a much higher power than UNDRIP itself. And so we have our legal processes in Canada. Taking an international document like that and trying to think that you can one size fits all within the confines of BC with how unique our situation is with Indigenous communities compared to even the rest of Canada for the most part in terms of lack of treaties and how all that process unfolded in our history, it just doesn't make any sense. And so it's not that you don't adhere to some of the fundamental principles in terms of actually seeking meaningful reconciliation and bringing people along. But you can't say that you believe in reconciliation and have two different populations at odds and whipsawing back and forth. We need to find that meaningful way forward. The courts, through rulings, have actually started to set that precedence. I'm simply saying, let's build off of those precedents that have spelled out from the Supreme Court rulings what has been held up as legal and proper consultation with Indigenous nations, and actually, for lack of a better word, codify it. And actually, for once, instead of the province just saying, well, you go figure it out, because that's what happens right now. If a municipality goes, for my time as the mayor of Kamloops, we'd ask the province, what does consultation look like to you? They say, well, you go do it. We can't tell you what it is. We'll tell you if we think it's been done properly or not after you tell us you're done. Well, that's no way for municipalities or Indigenous communities to figure out how to work forward on a path together. We need to actually base it on these successful court rulings out there that will provide that framework that would then hold up to other court challenges. And, you know, we talk about precedents all the time with court rulings. Well, let's use those court rulings to create that framework so it will hold up to legal scrutiny.
Let me ask you, before I let you go, how concerned are you about the tenor? You talk about communities at odds, you know, the tenor in this debate, and what role should leaders play in ensuring that there is no backlash, right? Concerns, but no backlash against reconciliation efforts and against Indigenous communities.
Well, that's always a concern, but you can't ultimately control everybody's commentary or how they phrase things. What average regular British Columbians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, are doing is conveying their emotions on this topic and their fears and their worries. And so it's not going to be as polished as a politician, perhaps, as the Premier or myself or others might frame up in terms of how they express that.
But are there some leaders that are fueling that rhetoric, though?
Well, there's definitely more rhetoric with some than others in terms of quick soundbite, absolutely on both sides, and so that is a concern. To me, it's about the actual deliverable. And if we actually are trying to move forward with reconciliation, which means Indigenous nations are respected and listened to, which means that resource projects can still move forward if they meet environmental and proper consultation with those Indigenous communities, so we can actually have our economy firing on all cylinders. If non-Indigenous communities in the area are actually properly at the table talking about land use issues with Indigenous communities at the same time, because they all hunt and fish and camp and recreate in those same areas, and make sure that that shared view of those land uses are being brought to the table at the same time and finding a way forward.
Okay.
I think that would go a long way. But right now, what we're seeing with the backdrop of DRIPA and these court rulings is that's throwing a wrench into that.
Peter Milobar, thank you very much for your time.
Great. Thank you. Anytime.
That is BC Conservative MLA for Kamloops, Peter Milobar, also running for the leadership of the party. Asking you for your thoughts. Should DRIPA be amended? If so, how? And what impact would that have on reconciliation? Again, 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. Let's go to a couple calls now. Ira is joining us from Hazelton. Hi there, you're a member of the Gitxsan Nation, Ira.
I am. Well, thank you for acknowledging that. Yes, the unceded territory of the Gitxsan Nation. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ira Good. I'm from the Gitxsan Nation. I'm from the Wilt of Liquid Zeus. And I was listening to your previous caller. Yeah, he had some very good points there. Like the court rulings. Let's bring in Delgamuukw right now. Delgamuukw we have our right to our territories and our land. And that was even before the Cowichan actually had their ruling in court. And that was a Supreme Court that we won against Canada. Anyway, my point is that reconciliation. What has reconciliation done since 2019, since it's been implemented? Have we even moved forward? We have to reconcile as Canadians. We as Canadians have to be as one, as firing on all cylinders, like he said. Absolutely, 100%. Canada needs revenue. Canada needs forest industry. Canada needs the oil industry. Canada needs everything to boost our economy. One of the things that we need to do is actually, implement UNDRIP. UNDRIP was one of the key features of us First Nations. Once we heard that, we rejoiced. We thought that reconciliation was going to be amazing. But now they're going to amend it again. For who? For themselves. Why don't they amend it for us? Consultation. Everything that we need to be brought to the table. We need to have our own word. We need to have our own say to our own territories, to our own lands. What we, as First Nations, we were here first. I could go on and on, but yeah, that's my key. No, don't amend it. Do not amend it. Work with it. Work with the courts. Work with Indigenous people. Let's come to the table and have an understanding.
Ira, thank you very much for the call from Hazelton. And let's go now to another caller who's joining us from Burnaby. And Christopher is on the line. Hi, Christopher. What are your thoughts on DRIPA? Should it be amended? And what would it mean for reconciliation?
Well, I can't say I'm not worried. As somebody's paying into a mortgage for so long that just it could go up in smoke, And I think it's affecting people buying property, which basically will affect everything. Like affects, the work, people buying lumber, paint, every trade is going to be affected here. So,
Okay.
That's my concern.
Christopher, thank you very much for the call from Burnaby. And Jan is calling us now from Texada Island. Your thoughts on DRIPA and whether it should be amended? What would it mean for reconciliation, Jan?
Yeah, well, I'm no lawyer, so I can't be sure what amendments would do. But
Sure.
what I was really grateful that you asked a question about the tenor of the debate, because that to me is really concerning, that so much disinformation ends up getting shared. And, I think it's important to respect property rights. If someone's paid money, we're going to do the best to recognize that. But I mean, there are all kinds of threats to property rights, for instance, flooding and fires and so on. So it's not as if this is the only threat. And in terms of the debate, I really wish people would take time to learn about what Indigenous people have endured for centuries. And now when there's so little space left for, it seems, for giving away land or recognizing how people have been, land has been stolen and some kind of recompense for that, it seems like, let's not go till the point where we actually have nothing to offer. And I guess the last thing I just wanted to say, too, is I was just shocked and appalled by how this government dealt with the Wet'suwet'en people who were trying to prevent their land rights from being violated. They would have accepted the pipeline going around their territory, but that would have cost more money. And so despite all their efforts that they had made, going to court, getting legal recognition, and so many efforts, the pipeline was pushed through. Well, and we know what goes with that pipeline, with the LNG, the fracking, the contamination of water.
Okay.
Yeah, get the point, I think, yeah.
Jan, thank you as well for your call from Texada Island. And let's go now to our next guest, Adam Olsen, former BC Green Party MLA and a member of the Tsartlip First Nation. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation.
What is your reaction to Premier David Eby saying the province will amend DRIPA in order to curb court powers, rather?
Well, I think it's really important that we have an opportunity to see what the Premier is offering in terms of an amendment. I have no idea whether or not, it's easy to say absolutely no amendments to the Declaration Act, but it's very difficult if you don't know what the context is of what the Premier is actually offering. I do know that there are several steps, though, that we need to undertake between the Crown and Indigenous communities before a repeal of the Act, of the Declaration Act, should even be considered. So, where the BC Conservative Party is going on this with, basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to use that turn of phrase, is a wrong-headed approach. And I think that it's really important that both the Premier Eby and the official opposition, so the government and the opposition, engage First Nations on what their plans are. So it's unclear whether or not the Premier has engaged with First Nations leaders about what he's considering in terms of amending the Act. From what I can see, the BC Conservatives have been ranting about the issues that they perceive to be, and they've got many of them confused since August, and yet they have not sat down with First Nations and had a conversation about what they would replace the Declaration Act with. So it's really, really critical that that we have a full conversation with the information in front of us, rather than just leveraging these really, really critically sensitive issues in this province that go back to before we were a part of the Confederation, before we were part of Canada. That we have informed conversations, that they're not emotional conversations, and that they exist in the legal reality that we exist in, and not some political reality that, benefits an opposition party for just banging away on the government and not dealing with the repercussions of what that could mean.
The criticism of the problem, what David Eby seems to be saying, at least right now, is that the focus of DRIPA should be on those, government to government negotiations, and not so much at the behest of court rulings and court decisions. Do you think that the province has done enough? You say, to sit down with First Nations communities. Is that where the province has lacked when it comes to implementing DRIPA? Is that face-to-face negotiation?
Well, I mean, it's certainly First Nations experience that some tables move much more efficiently than other tables move. Some types of agreements, like treaty agreements, seem to move much more easily than a reconciliation agreement or some other kind of governance agreements that First Nations are in the process of negotiating with the provincial government. And so, I think that's highlighting one of the potential solutions here is that, the province really expedites those conversations simply by adding more resources to them. Would just have those discussions and those negotiations move much smoother and to be much more effective. I think that we know that unilateralism is not something that has worked very well in this province. It's usually ended up in more conflict. And so it's really, really critical that both the Premier and the official opposition are fully engaged with First Nations leaders on this. The question about, that's come up around amending the Declaration Act has largely been around the Mineral Tenure Act in the Gitala case. And I think that it's really important for us to be very clear about the fact that we've known for a long time, more than decades probably, that the Mineral Tenure Act is very outdated and that it's needed to be updated for many years. It was something that I talked about often when I was an MLA in the legislature. And so, I think it's really important that, the duty to consult comes from the Haida case from a few decades ago. The provincial government has known that the Mineral Tenure Act has been out of date in that context, and it's needed to be updated. And so, I think that the order of things here is really important as well, that we allow the courts to do what they do in terms of figuring out the constitutionality of the laws that are created. We need our politicians to be amending the laws that they know are outdated. And we need to be very careful if we're going to be amending the Declaration Act, that we're very clear about what the outcomes of that will be as well. So, it's not a wrong process for the legislative branch to amend law. But it's really important that the public understands what they are. And in this case, with First Nations involvement and collaboration in the development of that act and the work that's been done since then, it's very important that they remain a key partner in these discussions.
And you're right when you refer to the mining case. This was a complaint, a legal challenge from the Githala and Hattusat First Nations against the province, and the claim was regarding the mining process, finding that it did not. There was a violation of the duty to consult with First Nations when it comes to those projects. Let me ask you, I asked Peter Milobar about the tenor of the debate. Are there not, though, the valid concerns? And when it comes to news, there's been a lot about the Cowichan Tribe's decision in Richmond. So because there are concerns around private homeowners and what that means for fee simple title, that was not sought, right, by the Cowichan Tribes in this case. No. But is there not that valid concern that what is going to be the impact of this kind of decision on private homeowners?
Look, I think that it's very important for our society to have stability when it comes to the private property rights that have been created and managed by the provincial government's land management system. There's no doubt about that. It's important to our economy. It's important to the quality of life in our communities. It's important to the millions of British Columbians that have made investment in that system that the province has maintained. It's also important that the province recognizes that there's been a lot of actions historically in this province that, where serious questions need to be answered. Let's just put it that way. And so it's really critical that this is a serious conversation between the Crown government and First Nations, and that the province of British Columbia is educating the people of the province of British Columbians about the history, how we got to where we're at, the fact that the land question lands at our feet in 2026 is not surprising. This has been, these have been a series of court cases in the jurisprudence over the last 50 or 60 years in this province. And it's very important that rather than having political parties taking advantage of what is a general lack of understanding of how we got to and why we're in the situation that we're in, it's the responsibility of our political leaders to be calm and to address these issues straight on and not use them and leverage them for their own political gain, which is the opposition is always trying to point out where the government has failed. That is their job. But when it comes down to basically targeting First Nations issues that have existed since the beginning of this province and calling court decisions a crisis, the reality is that our system works on the court doing its job to determine the constitutionality of these laws and the implications of that. And the legislative branch has a job to make sure that they're looking out for the people of British Columbia and the impact that those decisions are having. That is the process that we have. And it's really important that political parties are not leveraging those moments for their own partisan gain at the detriment of the quality of life in our society, the quality of life for Indigenous people in our society, the relationships across the line. The constant targeting of that in social media, on Reddit, these discussions has had a very deleterious effect in our society over the last 6 or 7 months. And we really need at this moment political leadership from the provincial government on all sides of the House to depoliticize this issue and to address it as it is, because it's not changed with the legal reality that we face has not changed with the introduction of the Declaration Act. It existed before. It would exist after the fact if the Declaration Act was repealed. Okay. And so it's really important. I really call on all of my former colleagues and the members of the legislature to please address this as it is and not to be leveraging these sensitive issues for their own political gain.
Adam Olsen, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Adam Olsen is a former BC Green Party MLA and a member of the Tsartlip First Nation. And we do have a clip for you from Premier David Eby taking questions at the Natural Resources Forum on this in Prince George. I think we're going to have to wait on that clip. We'll try to bring that to you in our next half hour. We do have it now. Let's hear from Premier Eby.
Section 35 of the Constitution of Canada recognizes Indigenous title rights. The courts have recognized those rights in British Columbia and mandated our government, any government at the provincial level, to work with First Nations together going forward. The Declaration Act gives us the framework of how to do that in an orderly way outside of court to minimize uncertainty, to minimize the risk of court decisions going sideways and creating further uncertainty. It gives us the structure, and it's not a straightforward path. It's not an easy path. There are steps forward, there are steps back, but it is a commitment to partnership through this work between us and First Nations leadership. And it's important for British Columbians to know that. This is essential work that we have to do, that this act provides the structure for us to do that, and it reduces uncertainty. The challenge with the court decisions, of course, is that they create that uncertainty that we're trying to avoid in two areas. First, around the Declaration Act, we need to be clear this is work that we're doing government to government, our government to First Nations governments together, not the courts. The second is around private property. There was a decision out of Richmond related to Cowichan, and we want to underline for British Columbians that reconciliation cannot be done at the expense of private property owners and private business owners. Their homes and businesses are not negotiation chips in this important work that we're doing together.
That's Premier David Eby speaking in Prince George within the last hour. You're with BC Today. It is 12:35. Let's pause now for a CBC News update. And here's Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. U.S. President Donald Trump says he is canceling his tariff threat on several European nations in his push for U.S. control of Greenland. Trump says he has come to terms with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on a framework of a future deal on Arctic security. Trump's announcement on social media came soon after he said in a speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos that he was backing off his threat of using military force. And here at home, Surrey Mayor Brenda Locke is urging Ottawa to create a national extortion commissioner in light of a rash of cases. Locke has sent a letter to the federal public safety minister asking for a more coordinated national effort. Surrey has seen 34 cases of reported extortion in the last 3 weeks. And now the forecast. The fog advisory continues for sections of Vancouver Island, the Sunshine Coast, and Metro Vancouver. The fog is expected to finally dissipate tomorrow afternoon. On the North Coast, mainly sunny this afternoon with a high of 7. Highs around -9 with lots of sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, mainly cloudy with a high of -10. Highs to -3 with valley cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, valley cloud as well with a high of 0. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, fog patches this afternoon with sunshine and highs from 5 to 9. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Rob, thank you very much. Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. We have some emails coming in on our topic from the last half hour asking you about DRIPA, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act in BC. The Premier saying that the province will amend it to curb the powers of the courts when it comes to implementing reconciliation. And we asked for your thoughts. And Mina writes us, I'm not Indigenous, but I will stand with them in respect for their rights and treaties. It has taken so long. Respect is needed, not fear. We still have too much ignorance and racism in BC and Canada. Their teachings are what we all need to observe now. Gisela writes from Kamloops, making changes to DRIPA because we don't like its impacts is putting our heads in the sand. DRIPA offered a path to reconciliation and ending the investment uncertainty that has plagued our province for decades. There is no way back. We must go through. It will be painful, but putting it off will only make it worse. And Joanne writes, who is a Clickley Tene elder living in Victoria, no surprise here, Indigenous people are used to 1 step forward and 10 steps back. The Supreme Court has to abide by Clause 35 of the Canadian Constitution, and making a sweeping comment by your Conservative guest is not true. Canadians should be upset with the millions of dollars in courts that are spent to fight themselves. I urge Canadians to do their own research instead of the political posturing by party members. When there is not a treaty in place, everywhere in Canada is unceded territory, not what your guest is implying. Joanne, thank you very much for your email as well. Thanks to all your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca is where you can send us your thoughts. $12:38 now. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, the Dine Out Vancouver Festival starts today, along with Taste Around BC, and tomorrow, Dine Around Victoria. All are aimed at getting the public to explore participating restaurants through special tasting menus and dining experiences. These annual events, though, are coming at a time when rising costs and inflation are impacting both restaurant owners and restaurant patrons. A survey last year by the BC Restaurant and Food Services Association found that nearly half of the restaurants in this province are struggling. Well, we're asking you, if you're not dining out much these days, what is preventing you from going to restaurants? And what will draw you back to a local restaurant in your neighborhood? We'd love to hear from you. Our number is 604-669-3733, 604-669-3733, or 1-800-825-5950. 1-800-825-5950. You can just hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. You can leave a comment on TikTok as well. I have two guests with me who do run restaurants. In fact, Margot Baloro is general manager of Vancouver's Wildlight Kitchen and Bar. She's with me in studio. And on Zoom, we're joined by Ross Derrick, who's owner of Derrick Steakhouse in Kelowna. And Derrick's also an inductee in the BC Restaurant Hall of Fame. I see we have the bigwigs here. Thank you for joining us. Good afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Hey, how's it going today?
Very well. Good to have you both. I imagine it's an exciting day for you. This, big events are happening. But Margot, what's been the experience at your restaurant lately?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. It has been a really lovely holiday season. Typically this time of the year, though, can be a little bit slower. Sure. So, Dine Out Vancouver allows us an opportunity, a 3-week period of just, getting people back to restaurants.
Yeah, and that's what it's for, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you find it makes a difference? Does it draw people?
Absolutely, yeah? Yes. I've worked in restaurants and operated restaurants in Vancouver for over 25 years. I think Dine Out Vancouver has been around about the same amount of time, and it's always been a really exciting and fun period of time in restaurants, and it's really lovely to see it continuing and evolving.
And Derrick, what about for you? What is this time of year like, or what has it been like at your restaurant in Kelowna?
Well, I think mirrors most other areas right now. So, Christmas was actually quite good this year for all of our restaurants.
That's great to hear.
Smaller parties, but really fun parties, which is always really great. But yeah, January is always typically slow, and it kind of is what it is. We actually have a restaurant up at a big white ski resort called the Cabin as well, and so that kind of helps us a bit because when it snows, we're busy up there, obviously. But in town, it was really a little bit of a normal January, just slow. But even starting yesterday, Dine Around hadn't started yet, or Taste Around hasn't started yet. But even yesterday, people are already excited and start going out a bit more. I think it's one of the most fun times to actually be a diner. It's funny, if I'm like at Facebook and all that this morning, I was looking at my memories and they're all like the different Taste Around and Dine Arounds from the last like 10 years. Because I always go out and go to the restaurants on like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays when I can get the time off from work, and I go to the other restaurants to see what they're doing because it's a really fun time. And in our restaurant, we let our like chefs, parties, and sous chefs kind of help out with the menus. So it's just fun because it's a bit creative and a bit different than what's normally on our menu.
Right,
So,
it's seen as an event. I mean, that's to be certain. But when you hear, 45% of restaurants in BC are struggling, what goes through your mind?
I think it has been a very difficult time overall in the last few years. We've seen a lot of really talented people leave the industry. We've seen, people sort of scale back their dining experiences, and costs are going up. Labor, cost of goods, whether it's smallwares, food, or beverage. That's something that restaurants have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
What has that meant for your restaurants? Inflation numbers just came out the other day as well, and the finding was food purchased at restaurants, so this is if you're eating at a restaurant, increased 2.6% on an annual average last year. It was down from the year before, but yes, inflation is affecting your profit margin, I'm sure. So what is that like?
You have to think on your feet. You have to make sure that you're taking full advantage of every ingredient that comes through the door, that you're providing a service experience that people will want to come back for, and making sure that you're consistent in what you're delivering.
And what kind of adaptations have you had to make then?
We're just always trying to find, ways to connect with our regulars. When they come in the door, what are they looking for? What's new, what can get them excited, and, being able to provide, products, keeping up on what's out there, and adjusting to trends, and just, trying to be nimble.
Okay, yeah, and that relationship with the regulars, I think that's key. And what about for you, Derrick? What has the cost of food meant for your restaurant?
well, we have a steakhouse, so price of beef has been
Oh
very
my
interesting
goodness,
to be
beef,
following
yes.
recently, and being a luxury item, just what it is. It's, steakhouses are a little bit more expensive and they're a little bit more of a celebratory place. So we definitely have noticed that. But with that, it's also allows us for a lot of creativity. We're working with, L&D Meats and the Lickmans in Kelowna, really working on getting some really beautiful beef from different areas. We use a farm in Enderby we're doing all of our large cuts with, so we can be creative with it. But inflation in restaurants is always going to be there, and operating in restaurants it's never been easy. So, I think sometimes the stats
Margot's nodding, yeah.
45%. Yeah, I've been in it I'm 26 years this year, in June, from, rolling in to be a dishwasher. And I've never heard anybody ever say that running restaurants was easy or simple. It's a very complicated business. The margins are actually quite low. The expectations of service are quite high. And, everybody will have an opinion on what you're doing. So I just believe in really strong hospitality. Is what drives it. You know, our steakhouse, it's the dream restaurant that I always wanted to open. It's very, very personal to me. And the goal is it's every day we offer exceptional hospitality. And I think that no matter what restaurant you're in, whether it's, you know, our fish and chip shop would be the same. That's Broken Anchor is a small little 27-seat restaurant that's been now for coming on 12 years. But it was always, yeah, we served fish and chips. We offered really good hospitality, and that built my whole company. You know, we have 3 restaurants opening up another soon. But that's what it is. It's just be there, be present, offer good hospitality, and offer people the experience that they actually came for. Nobody goes to a restaurant to not have anything less than a stellar time. And I think every restaurant, if, you know, the restaurants are struggling, but some restaurants, you know, just focus on the hospitality being the reason why we're in the business. I like to make people happy. I like birthdays. I like anniversaries. I like, you know, weddings. I like all those things that put smiles on people's faces. And I think as an industry, like, we need to realize that when guests come in the door, it should be celebratory, even if it's a Monday afternoon.
Even if it's
you know,
fish and
people
chips.
are there with their friends. Yeah.
My 2 guests here, Derrick, pardon me, is the owner of Derrick Steakhouse in Kelowna, and Margot Baloro is general manager of Vancouver's Wildlight Kitchen and Bar. And we are asking you, in light of these events, you know, Dine Out Vancouver, Dine Around Victoria tomorrow, Taste Around BC, these are all aimed at getting you to dine out. So we're asking you, what's keeping you from doing so? And what would draw you into a local restaurant? We've heard about hospitality, relationships with regulars. What's something that would make a difference for you to get you to frequent a restaurant, patronize a restaurant? It's 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. Again, 604-669-3733. And 1-800-825-5950. Lauren is calling us now from Penticton. Hi, Lauren. Welcome to the show.
Good
to have you. And so, are you able to go to a restaurant, or is there something that's kind of keeping you away?
Well, yeah, the price of food is going up too high, and the tipping is getting out of hand, and retired people just can't afford to do that stuff anymore.
Yeah. What would be something? I mean, so it's the cost, obviously. I think that's kind of a common refrain. What would be something that would draw you back or convince you to go back?
Well, that good food, and a lot of it, like a lot of places you go, you pay $30 or $35, and I could eat 2 of them. You know, like,
right.
So. You know, so the quantity is not that, and then they want a 24% tip, and you know, we just can't do it. You know,
the serving size, yeah. Lauren, thank you very much. Good to have you on the show. That's Lauren in Penticton. Okay, Margot and Ross, tipping. It's become controversial. You know, people have expressed frustration about it to the extent that we have some restaurants who have actually implemented no tipping policies. You know, what do you think of that?
It is something that I think this industry, you know, since we face so many challenges, we have to explore everything. Everything is sort of up for relooking at, and I think it's always a good opportunity to evolve and adapt. And that's something that we've been doing over the last few years. So, you know, the no tipping policy is something that, you know, it's talked about a lot, but it definitely takes a big movement, I would say, and some changes all at once.
Okay. So do you see momentum behind this at all, Ross? Or?
No. You know, I think tipping's interesting. Like you know, going to a fast food joint and having a tipping option, I think is interesting. I started in fast food and we definitely didn't get tips then. But when you're at a higher end establishment, where, you know, good servers, they can sell and they are salesmen, and that's what they're doing. And they're offering an experience. And, you know, I do think that, you know, the tipping system as it is right now in Canada, it's either everybody changes at once or it won't be changed, especially when you're going out to like an experience of a restaurant. It is part of our culture. And it is interesting in certain areas. Like I don't agree with some of the places that have them, but in you know, sit down restaurants, I think it's not really going to go anywhere. And I think if it does, you're going to lose a substantial amount of the hospitality workers that work there in those restaurants. 25 years ago, my neighbor across the street, when I was just getting interested in the industry, I think he was working at a steakhouse in Winnipeg, making $100,000 a year in the year 2000, and he was getting paid minimum wage as a wage, and then his selling and it's a commission kind of system, right? And that's you can offer somebody 30, 40, 50 bucks an hour, but they're not going to accept it. But at the same time, if we increase the wages, which we would have to do, we would increase it to the amount that they would be making on average, and the cost of dining is going to be the same. And that is kind of what it is. It's if at our restaurant, we would increase our salary of our service to $35 an hour, and that would be reflected on the menus, because I'm not taking home $1 million a year. I wish I was, but there's definitely better ways to make money than in the owning restaurants. But it's restaurant owners, and we're not lining our pockets by having the tipping system as it is. It's not like that. So
and your point is taken that either way, whether it's wages or through tipping, that is going to be passed down to the consumer at some point.
It will be, and it is what it is. And I think to go out for a nice experience, I do think that dining, for me, like, I always think it should be an event. It should be something fun. It should be exciting. And maybe people need to make the choices on when they go out and how they go out and how they spend their money. But I think every time you go out and gather with friends, that there's a memory that's going to be made. So I think it's worth it. And I always do.
Yeah, I'll just go to some emails and another caller here. Lots of emails coming in as we ask you, in light of the start of Dine Out Vancouver and Taste Around BC, Dine Around Victoria tomorrow, what is keeping you from dining out? Restaurants, nearly half of restaurants last year said they were struggling. What's keeping you away from dining out? What would bring you back? I'd love to hear from you. 604-669-3733, 604-669-3733. Or what keeps you going back to a restaurant? If there is one that you love and that you frequent, that you're a fan of, what keeps you going back despite the costs that so many people are dealing with? Colleen writes in Vancouver, it is so expensive having a couple of drinks, and that can be $40 without food, and then there are so many taxes. I've always noticed how much less bills are in Alberta. By the time you put on tax and tip, it is another 30%. When I go out, it is usually just for a few drinks and shared snacks, and maybe during happy hour. And I can't afford more than once or twice a year. Maureen writes, what's keeping me from dining out more often is the expectation of a 20% tip. David writes, we have always enjoyed Dine Out Vancouver, even though as someone who has never had an interest in drinking alcohol, I'm penalized with the absence of non-alcohol happy hour drinks. It doesn't have to be an invented drink, just one of the many no-alcohol beers and wines. Jerry writes from Prince George, this is what stops me from going to restaurants. Poor nutrition, not enough complete nutrients in a meal, too much salt and sugar, and emphasis on taste versus nutrition. Thank you very much for your email there, bctoday@cbc.ca. Let's go to another caller now, and Cheryl is joining us from Ladner. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi.
Hi, thanks. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't usually call on the show, so I'm a little nervous.
Oh, glad to have you. Yeah. What keeps you from going to a restaurant if you're not able to?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, I'm 70 now, so in previous decades I didn't really have that budget, and now I do. So I'm really lucky that so the money's not the issue now, but I do have nutritional issues. So one of the reasons would be not knowing what's in the food, and one particular thing would be that canola oil is too present, and there's a certain some of the hidden foods that are added. Are the ingredients that are added can give me nutritional problems. So that would be one reason where I'm just reluctant. So I'm really careful what I order, and I'm careful to have small amounts. Also, I travel more now, and so I am eating a lot just because I'm traveling. And so maybe at home I'm not eating that as much.
Right.
I mean, tonight I'm going to one of the Dine Out things because I'm taking my daughter for her birthday.
Oh, how nice.
It's not like, yes, it is.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm open to doing it. And also somebody I think one of the owners talked about having things cozy. And I grew up in California, and I lived in a place called Santa Cruz for a couple of years when I was quite young. This is in the 70s. And I remember there was just the most intimate, small little restaurants, some of them one crate place that only fit like 12 people. And there were just, some of those restaurants were so charming. And yeah, that
Ambiance.
would be amazing.
Yeah.
So
Cheryl,
the reason I would be, yes, go ahead.
No, thank you so much for calling. I have to move into our next caller. I appreciate you calling in. Please do so again and have a great time with your daughter today, okay? That's Cheryl in Ladner. I have Lisa on the line in Nanaimo, who I think is on her lunch break. I just want to get her in before she has to go back to work. Hi, Lisa.
Hello there.
Hi. Go ahead. Yeah,
Thanks
what are your thoughts on dining out?
Yeah. I just wanted to actually respond to your panelists' comments about tipping. And just to add, I think most patrons are more than happy to pay a tip for good service. I think where things are getting challenging is that, there was a time when 10 to 15% was considered a decent tip. And now when the tipping option starts at 20 or 25% and goes up from there, it really starts to feel like a gouge, especially when the vast majority of the time the service is not all that great. Personally, I love going to, especially family-owned or independent restaurants. And if I get exceptional service, I make sure my tip is exceptional. But I don't think that should be the expectation personally. And I think that's a big turnoff for a lot of people.
Lisa, there you have it. Thank you so much for calling in. And that emphasis on the experience, I think that Ross, that you were as well echoing, right? And that's something that Lisa says is what draws her back. What a great discussion. Good luck to both of you as Dine Out starts. I hope that it is a busy time for both your restaurants. That's Margot Baloro, the general manager of Wildlight Kitchen and Bar. Ross Derrick is the owner of Derrick Steakhouse in Kelowna, also an inductee into the BC Restaurant Hall of Fame.